Welcome back to the lecture of Environmental Regulation series, where we are talking about today's impact of fees, emission fees, as well as the taxes and the subsidies on the cost curve of the firms. We're considering the long run. In the first part, we discussed about the short run. In the long run, there are certain assumptions we have considered. Assume a constant cost industry and that all the firms will operate under the bottom of their average total cost curves in the long run equilibrium. And as a result, this would imply that the supply schedule for the industry is going to be horizontal. Goods prices will be higher with the Pigou taxes. Now, why we are calling it as Pigou tax? In most of this time in environmental economics, the emission fee we charge or the taxes imposed by the government is most of the time considered as with the name Pigou tax. So, we see that the prices are going to shoot up when there is a Pigou tax in comparison when there is a subsidy on the emission reduction. In the long run, there will be more firms with the subsidy than in case of the Pigou tax or emission fee. A subsidy is considered undesirable as it does not allow the market to communicate the true cost of the product which is consumed by the consumer, because it's a transfer from government and it affects the cost curve. Therefore, the real costs are not revealed, and therefore, when the product generates pollution, we want the consumers to decide the full cost associated with the producing and the product. When the consumers decide what they have to buy and how much they have to buy, then it becomes a asymmetrical information. So, for efficiency point of view, subsidies are not considered efficient in economics. So, it is the taxes which are considered in a better, holding a better position in terms of efficiency. Now, once we consider this in the long run scenario, you can see on the display that these variable costs, how do these costs now in the long run, variable costs are immaterial. So, therefore, we consider only one variant of cost, average total cost curves and the marginal cost. It is only the role of marginal cost and average total cost that is useful in deciding about the emission efficient level of production and the prices. So, as you can see, then that in case of subsidy, average total cost gets lowered down as comparison to Pigou tax or the emission taxes. So, this is how the impact of long run is. Let us move on our discussion to the next level of impact of taxes and subsidies, emission taxes and subsidies on the firms, where we talk about the imperfect competition. The moment we enter into the regime of imperfect competition, the whole discussion rotates or revolves around the notion of efficiency. The issue of efficiency arises when the markets are not in the competition and there is an imperfect competition. So, we consider here for our simplicity two scenarios or two cases in the regime of imperfect competition. Case A and case B. Case A is a monopolist in the goods market who is also a polluter. So, he is a monopolist in a goods market A means that there is only one single producer in the goods market. Monopolists may dominate the steel market. Let us consider an example of a steel market where there is only one producer of steel and who's also generating smoke. However, as a generator of smoke, the person is not confined to monopolists. There are other producers of smoke also. So, let us consider this A case like this. The other case is of a firm who is only producer in that region of the smoke, who's a monopolist in production of a bad, which is a smoke. So, considering these two scenarios, let us talk about efficiency when we have taxes and what happens to the point of production of efficiency. What happens to the dead weight loss and what are the differences in the dead weight loss scenarios? Now, when there is a market power, when talking about monopolism, imperfect competition, so there is a market power existing, and when there is a market power, an emission fee can make matters worse. So, it is important to note that in the scenario when there is always already a market power existing, in such a case, imposing an emission fee will make it worse in terms of efficiency. This is considered as theory of second best. This implies that when there is a distortion in the economy already in the form of monopoly, levels of output and the prices will be distorted, mainly implying that they are not efficient, they are not producing at their efficient levels. In such cases, the best way to correct the inefficiency will not be use the prescription from the theory of that is developed for efficiency. We will move on to the second best methods, and once we move on to the second best methods must be due to the correct it will solve the problem or correct the problem of efficiency. We consider here the two examples. One is a monopolistic example and the other one is a monopsonist operating in the pollution market. So, case A is a monopolist in the goods market and case B is a monopsonist in a pollution market, that is bad market. Pollution market is considered as a bad market. Now, in case A, when we are considering a monopolist in the goods market, certain assumptions are there. We assume that the steel industry is a monopoly and it produces smoke. There are, however, many other smoke producers, but only one producer of steel. Smoke and steel, and they both are proportional. These are for our simpler understanding. We assume simple things. So, this firm is a single monopolist in the goods market of steel, but there are other competition as far as the pollution is concerned. In such a scenario, we consider this diagram where we talk about the efficiency. Here, we consider a downward sloping demand curve and the marginal cost curve. This is and corresponding to the AR curve, which is demand curve, there is a MR curve, downward sloping MR curve. Now look at the levels of production. For efficiency, when we talk about, in case of monopoly, we talk about unregulated monopoly, we consider SU. SU is the steel production. On the horizontal axis, we are plotting steel production. And steel production have different points and levels of production, SU, S star and ST. As the subscript describe you, SU is the steel production in case of unregulated market and S star is the efficient level of production, while ST is the production when there are taxes, Pigouvian tax on the emission. So, on the vertical axis, we are plotting marginal cost curves, marginal cost curve when there is unregulation, marginal cost curve when there are taxes, and also we are plotting prices on the vertical axis. Keeping this scenario, let us now start visualizing and understanding the points of production. when there is no regulation, we are producing at SU. SU is the point when the marginal cost unregulated is equated to MR. Now, why we are equating MR equal to MC? Because we are under the monopoly scenario of goods market. So, the point of equilibrium will exist at A. As you can see in the diagram, it is A that will lead to the SU, optimal output of production of steel, and why the prices will be decided by the AR curve, which is ABC, right? So, the prices will be the PU, which is price of unregulated. Now, as you can see, because it's a monopoly, you are producing at a very low level, lower than what is efficiently required, S star. Now, what is S star? S star is the level of production of steel when you have incorporated the pollution. When you have accounted for the pollution, your marginal cost curve gets shifted to MCT. MCT is the rise of marginal cost when you have incorporated the cost of pollution. Therefore, the equilibrium in that case will exist at S star. So, S star is the efficient level of production of steel when that pollution has been taken into account. Now, given this, now we can easily visualize or compute the deadweight loss occurring due to efficiency or inefficiency. Due to inefficiency of monopoly, we have shifted from S star to SU, and that has resulted into a deadweight loss. Now we can quickly see how that has resulted into deadweight loss if you are under monopoly itself. Not even taxed. Taxation will come later, but because you're already a monopolist in the goods market, there is a loss of deadweight loss and there is a loss of efficiency. A typical demand curve for steel and associated marginal revenues you saw in the diagram that they were already plotted, and the marginal cost of producing steel ignoring the pollution, it led to MCU. We have seen those cost curves. Now, and the prices, we saw that they are determined by the demand curve, and this calls for computing the inefficiency. As you saw in the diagram, there was a triangle shaded, and that triangle shaded was ABC triangle. ABC triangle reflects deadweight loss from the unregulated monopoly considering unregulated MC. You can see again on the diagram that ABC triangle is the result of the deadweight loss because of monopoly, and this deadweight loss is because of why we have producing under the efficient optimal production. We are not producing at S star. Taking into account the social cost of steel production, the optimal production could have been S star. The actual deadweight loss associated with unregulated output of steel considering the true marginal cost, because the true marginal cost is MCT considering the pollution. That triangle is DBE. I go back to the diagram. DBE. DBE is the triangle when you consider the deadweight loss due to the pollution. When you have incorporated pollution, then what kind of a deadweight loss you generate? You generate DBE. And thus you have reduced the deadweight loss once you capture the pollution cost. However, the area between the true MC function MCT and the demand curve bounded by SU and S star is what is described as the deadweight loss after incorporating the pollution or the social cost. So, this is smaller than what we were considering the unregulated case. The reason is that when an unregulated monopolist reduces the output to increase the profit, it also reduces the pollution. As you can see, the pollution has also been reduced if you reduce the output, because output and pollutions are proportionally related. Therefore, it is automatically reduced, and once you reduce pollution, you have taken care of cost of pollution, and therefore the dead weight loss also gets reduced. The area of ADEC is the area additional to dead weight loss of conventional analysis, ignoring the pollution. Now, suppose we impose the emission fee on the smoke generation, raising the private marginal cost of production to MCT. Suppose we are imposed, that typical firm is imposed by prices or taxes of pollution, then the monopolist will be keep on producing at SU, will not be able to sustain SU, but will produce somewhere else. And what will be the point of production? It is where marginal cost function is equated to marginal revenue at ST. So the new marginal cost curve, which is MCT, is equated to MR. And now the efficiency, the region which is results is GHBD. I'll just go back to the graph. So GHED is the region which is again generated once you impose taxes. You are producing at ST, not even at SU. So once such a firm is taxed, the point of production shifts even lower than SU, and that is ST. At ST, what kind of additional dead weight loss you generate? That is GHBE. So this is horizontal shaded area, as you can see in the graph. That is the result of reduction due to imposition of emission tax. It reflects that the imposition of emission fees has worsened the matter. How? Because you have finally landed up reducing the product output even further to ST, and you have raised prices further, and therefore you are operating even in a worse scenario, even lower than the efficient level, worsen the efficiency. Efficiency is not served if there is too much or too little of pollution. So this statement is the key thumb rule for the economy. So for efficiency, it is very, very crucial to note that efficiency will not be served at all if you reduce the pollution too much or you are producing too much of pollution. In both the scenarios, you are not serving efficiency. Monopoly tends to reduce output and emission, assuming there is no intervention. So if an emission fee is also imposed along with monopoly, output is restricted even further, and consequently we see that we have too little good produced in the economy and very small proportion of smoke or emission being produced, which is less than desirable. So a little amount of smoke generated can be considered as desirable if the production of that smoke is efficient. If you try to reduce even further that little amount, then you may land up with inefficiency. So this statement that too much or too little of pollution is inefficient is something one needs to take into account while creating or while designing the policy. We consider a firm that is competitive in its good market, but it is now let's move on shift our discussion to the second case, which is monopsony in the bad production, where there is only one firm we consider that is in the competition in the good market, but it is the monopoly or sole producer of pollution. So it is the only firm polluting. So it has a monopoly in the pollution market, but it is competitive in the goods market. In this condition, it is considered that monopolist provider of the pollution. So we have to talk about a market of pollution, not the goods. So in such a case, we consider a polluter where the payments are made by the firm to the regulatory authority, and that is given by the total cost. How do the total cost curves and taxes are retrieved by the firm? Now we consider that those taxes collected from this type of firm, who is the only producer of smoke or pollution, is given by, taxes are given as a function of emission. So we consider what we have written on the screen, that TS is equal to S into MDS. The firm wants to produce where the marginal cost equals the marginal revenue. And what is the marginal cost? Marginal cost for this firm is considered as marginal tax payment, because tax is coming as a cost for the firm, and we consider those as marginal tax payment, and we try to, for efficiency point of view, we try to equate it to the marginal revenue. Marginal revenue are the marginal savings from the pollution. So considering our theory of environmental pollution scenario, how do we tax? We tax the marginal damages, and marginal damages are opposite, they behave from the savings. So these are the equations being worked out, where marginal taxes, from the total tax collection, we try to find out the marginal taxes which serve as marginal cost to the firm. So as the equations reveal, so finally we come up with the graph, which is in this manner, the way it is looking at in the diagram, that marginal damage function is a downward sloping function, and marginal tax function, which is a marginal, considered as marginal cost, is a upward sloping function. And we try to find efficiency by using these two graphs, marginal damage graph and marginal tax graph. So marginal tax graph, wherever they are equated, S star is the exact amount of pollution, which is optimal amount of pollution, and we try to find out the equilibrium based on this. So the marginal savings to the firm from producing a smoke S, and marginal damage from the smoke is MD. It is decided to impose a tax, pollution tax, equal to marginal damage from the smoke. So once the firm is taxed and we are in the market of pollution, what we are drawing the graph is for the pollution market, not for the good market. So what is the efficient level of tax that must be implemented or imposed on the firm, and what is the efficient amount of smoke generated? This is our objective in this scenario. Instead of setting the tax equal to marginal damage of S, we set up the tax to marginal damage S at whatever levels we are. So we do not, at various levels of S, what we try to do is we equate the marginal taxes to marginal damage graph. So the polluter faces a slope of marginal damage function, and it knows exactly that it can lower its emission tax by reducing the emission. So in this monopolistic case, when there is only one single polluter, we have a liberty to the polluter to decide the emission and the taxes. So how do we equate the efficiency level? By equating the marginal damage to the marginal taxes. And this is what the notion is, that you give the liberty in the hands of monopolists to decide the efficient level of taxes. This will cost the firm a substantial amount of abatement cost, but the firm may be willing to take this. Monopolist, here in the graph also we said TM, S star, T, T star, these are the efficient level, star are the efficient level of taxes and emission, while M and as the TM is the monopolist taxes and SM is the monopolist smoke. As you can see again in the diagram, how we equate T star, S star, SM, TM. So this is how we try to obtain optimality in case the firm is a sole producer of emission in the pollution market. Monopolist provider of the pollution can manipulate the emission tax by reducing the pollution at the efficient level. So there will be a less pollution below the efficient level. As you can see in the diagram, emission optimal level of pollution is S star, smoke, but the monopolist can produce as SM, creating a deadweight loss here also. It is operating at below efficiency will create a deadweight loss, and we can see the shaded area, and we saw that how the deadweight loss is again created by a monopolist who's a single producer of pollution. There will be less pollution below the efficient level, but it comes at a cost and it comes as a deadweight loss. So again we endorse our statement that too much of pollution and too little of pollution is undesirable. However, too little pollution may imply that too many resources are devoted to pollution control. Those resources are being diverted from other socially desirable purposes, and those have been unproductively utilized in reducing pollution. So it's a very important deduction from today's lecture. We conclude our lecture saying that this lecture overviewed the impact of emission fees or subsidies on the firms, how the cost curves are getting affected in both the scenarios. We also saw that both in the short run and long run, how the firm's cost curve get affected, what is the level of optimality and efficiency, and what kind of a deadweight loss do we get at the end of the day when we tax in various scenarios. The notion of efficiency is examined when the subsidies and the emission fees are imposed. So the entire lecture was based on Colstead book, Intermediate Environmental Economics, published by international, it is an international edition. So all the graphs and all the material can be found in that book. So thank you for the patience and thank you so much for listening. Thank you.